start. So then taking inspiration from that, Shampoo started ISKCON Youth Forum in Pune. And so Maharaj had a great role to play in inspiring youth meeting all over India. Uh, Later on, Maharaj also was there in Hyderabad and Secunderabad and all those areas. Later he went to Indonesia. He established six rural communities in Indonesia, and also he established a youth meeting there in Indonesia. Later on, Maharaj wanted to introduce this concept of Varnashram as taught by Srila Prabhupada in academic circles. So he himself entered education field and he did his master's in education, and he did comparative study of Gurukuls in India and Indonesia, some things like that. And then later on in 2006, he went to Cambodia. There also he started Varnashram communities, and he started Yeshadapur ashram there. And then in 2006, again he came to India and he started Sayad Distribution Balram Kshetra every project. And from there he also started this Varnashram college courses and other things. Maharaj has been very active in spreading this Varnashrama teachings. In 2007 he started National Varnashram Development Committee in India. And in 2009 he was made as Daiva Varnashram, ISKCON Daiva Varnashram Minister. So Maharaj is mainly focused on developing this lifestyle, Vedic lifestyle centered around cows and land, and as is there in the spiritual world also. Maharaj has written many books. Some of the very famous books written by Maharaj Varnashram Education, named in our villages. And currently Maharaj is also doing PhD in Vedic sociology in Varnashram, and so that he can use these things in the academic community properly. And Maharaj, on that opportunity, visited 108 villages. He also visited the Kharagpur and all villages there, and also Purli and villages there, and Silpur village. All the villages Maharaj personally went, and he interviewed so many. Every village he used to interview 6 leaders there and 40 community people. 108 villages. And he stayed so many days, and also that he also went abroad. And ISKCON has communities, very farm communities, 10 of the important farm communities of Maharaj. Interview all the devotees, and he collect all the data to present it. This is Maharaj is at this age 70 plus, but Maharaj is so dynamic and so enthusiastic in helping people to understand the concepts of Vedic Varnashram. Very difficult today because of everywhere modern civilization is spreading and Vedic life and all is getting extinguished. Maharaj is because Prabhupada mentioned 50% of work is remaining, and
Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajadana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanamsari Yamuna Tira Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Bolo. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Govinda Radha Govinda Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Gaurapremanande. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pri Bhadrakacharya Stotra Satta Sri Sima His Divine Grace Shirabhai Charanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Sri Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki ISKCON BBT Founder Charan Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki Samadata Bhakti Vrinda Ki Harinam Sankirtan Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all glories, Sandasya Gyananjana Shalaka Chakshurmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Vadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahavana Raghunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Saharana Lalita Shri Vishakam Hai Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Taptakansana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Nanamami Hare Priye Vansakalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Jodhayam Mudiraya. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, let us first offer our respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayana Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Sri Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Prayashabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the dear devotee, all that is troublesome within our heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, it becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamhitam Uttama Shloka Charitam Sakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreyasaya Lokasya Dhanyam Swaswayanam Mahat. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Surabhyaya Namaha. Om Surabhyaya Namaha. Om Surabhyaya Namaha. Mukham karoti vachalam pangom langayate girim yat kripatamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam yat kripa. Welcome to all the devotees for the daily Bhagavatam class. We are continuing from canto number 10, chapter 35, entitled The Gopis Sing of Krishna. And there are two texts, but one on the board is 15. Savanashas tad upadharya Suresha Shakra Sarva Paramesti Purogaha Kabaya Anata Kandhara Chittaha Kashmalam Savanashastad Upadharya Suresha Chakra Sarva Paramesti Purogaha Kabaya Ananta Kandara Chitta Hashmalam Yayur Anishchita Tattva Savanashastar Upad Dharya Suresha Shakra Sarva Paramesti Puroga Kabaya Anata Kandara Chitta Hasmalam Yayur Anishchita Tattva Savanashasthadupadharya Suresha Chakra Sarva Paramesti Puroga Kabaya Anata Kandara Chitta Hasmalam Yayur Anishita Tattva. Savanasha, with a variety of low, high, and little pitches. Tat, that. Upadharya, hearing. Sura Ishaha, the principal demigods. Shakra, Indra, Sharva, Shiva, Paramisti, and Brahma. Puragaha, headed by Kavayaha, learned scholars. Anata, bowed. Kandara, their necks. Chittaha, and minds. Kashmalam, Yayu, they became bewildered. Anishchita, unable to ascertain. Tattvaha, its essence. This is actually a combination of two verses, 14 and 15. We have just read 15, but I will read the whole translation of both verses, 14 and 15. O pious Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his bimba red lips and sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and hearts. Kindly repeat after me. O pious Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his bimba red lips and sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music. And thus they bow down their heads and hearts. Purport. The words Tava Sutta Sati, your son, O chaste lady, clearly indicate that at this point, Mother Yashoda is among the young gopis as they earnestly describe Lord Krishna's glories. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti, among the demigods led by Shakra, Lord Indra, were Upendra, Agni, and Jamaraj. Among those led by Sharva, Lord Shiva, were Katyayani, Skanda, and Ganesh. And among those led by Paramesti, Lord Brahma, were the four Kumaras and Narada. Thus, the best collective intelligence in the universe could not definitely analyze the enchanting musical arrangements of the Supreme Lord. I'll just read the verse again. O pious Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his bimba red lips and sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that arts. So of course, who's translating? Everyone knows English? Already arranged, yeah? Okay. Yeah. So of course, this chapter and this particular verse is taking us directly in Vrindavan and is describing the feelings of separation of the gopis in Vrindavan when Krishna every day leaves in the morning and stays away most of the day along with his many. There are many references to this flute, because this is mentioned here especially, how Krishna, by his expertise in playing the flute, we know how in the Nectar of Devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami describes the 64 qualities of the Supreme Lord, 4 of which are only manifest by Lord Krishna. And of course, one of those is playing the flute. It's not that only Krishna plays the flute, but only Krishna plays the flute the way he plays the flute. Which, as nicely described here, mesmerizes, confuses the most intelligent, highly elevated personalities of the universe. Actually, the flute, Krishna's flute, is mentioned from the very beginning of the creation, isn't it? When Lord Brahma is sitting, finding himself on top of the lotus, initially he's confused, as we know, and then he hears the word tapa. He understands, oh, okay, I have to perform tapa. I have to go in meditation. He goes into meditation for a very long period of time. And then at one point, he actually receives Gayatri, receives the Vedic knowledge through the sound of the flute, Krishna's flute. It's very interesting actually how, of course, nowadays is, how many of you are going out with the cows with the flute? It is something traditional when villages used to be villages. When people were, when young boys actually, the main activity for the majority of boys, young boys, is actually meant to be herding cows. We have very much deviated from that primary activity in our modern day society. That's a whole, of course, subject matter. But this playing of flute is significant in many ways. There is reference being made here to just like the Sanskrit language. Sanskrit language is, as we know, the most perfect of all languages. It is known as the mother of all languages. And I'm sure many of you also know how some years back, when the most powerful brains on the planet who are connected with NASA, who are always planning how to conquer the universe or how to explore the universe, and therefore they have all kinds of very advanced technology. And because they're dealing with so much of data, they were trying to find out which language would be the best to utilize in their research. And then after analyzing so many languages, they fell upon Sanskrit. They adopted Sanskrit as the perfect language for their, purposes. In a similar way, music, in the Vedic culture, music is much more, let's say, developed than so-called modern music which is largely, to a large extent, actually not music but noise. So heavy noise, you have to like cover your ears practically. Everything actually connected with the Vedic culture is very, very deep, very profound. Some of you might have seen some people, occasionally they post or even the guitar. It's very interesting. I mean, this is being described here especially because cows are in the mode of goodness. Naturally, they probably don't like modern music. Right? They like what we call classical music. So the most classical and the most traditional music is what we find actually in the Vedic literatures. And flute is especially very, very soothing to the heart. And it is for this reason that Krishna and the cowherd boys as well, when they go out in the forest, you know, they have a very good time all day. It's not a very, you know, physically hard task or hard work to take the cows. We come across wonderful descriptions of the boys just being there and having a great time actually herding the cows. And one of the pastimes is to actually play the flute, which is very nice. Descriptions are there actually, I believe in the Nectar of Devotion, and I'm sure in this 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. The playing of Krishna's flute is so captivating. It's described that actually whenever Krishna begins to play his flute, all the cows become like stunned and their ears just go, they shoot out. They're just completely absorbed in hearing this transcendental sound vibration of Krishna's flute. And that playing of Krishna's flute is so powerful. It is described that even, I mean, everything stops in Vrindavan, including the Yamuna. The Yamuna stops to flow. A little difficult for us to these descriptions are there actually. This is these descriptions of the life in Vrindavan is something that most of us have not experienced. We were discussing how of all of the different pastimes of the Lord, his most attractive pastimes are those that he performs in the small village of Vrindavan. The Vrindavan that we see today is very different than the Vrindavan that used to be there many years ago. So when a village like Vrindavan is having personalities, I mean, Krishna and all the residents of Vrindavan, they are the Lord's associates. It describes how, our Shastra describes there's three types of living entities who participate in Krishna's pastimes when he appears in Vrindavan. The first category are those who are his eternal associates. they actually, just like Krishna comes down, descends from the spiritual world, and he brings along with him many of his eternal liberated souls. Second category are different demigods who are also requested to be with Krishna and perform his pastimes. And the third category, something that should be of interest to all of us, the third category of associates are those who are just about ready to go back to the spiritual world. Because I'm sure you've heard how we don't immediately go back to Goloka. We must first spend or be with Krishna in some universe, in some planet where the Lord performs his pastimes. And in this way, in other words, conditioned living entities in the material world who take up to the practice of devotional service, they get this opportunity to be with Krishna when he performs his pastimes in Vrindavan. So these pastimes of Vrindavan are very important for us to understand because the center is Krishna. Especially here, it is describing the position of the gopis. The gopis, every single day, they are speaking to Mother Yashoda, and they are expressing their different feelings of separation from Krishna because he's gone all day. And it is nicely described that in the afternoon, when Krishna returns with the cowherd boys and the cows, the gopis are standing by, just waiting to get that first glimpse of Krishna. Why are these pastimes in Vrindavan so attractive? Because they actually, in that atmosphere of village life, such as Vrindavan, Krishna gives an opportunity actually to all of these different associates who are with him to exchange in very wonderful relationships. Spiritual life actually is all based on relationship. Our whole Vaishnava culture, Vaishnava philosophy as taught by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is based on these three most important principles of Sambandha, Abhideya and Prayojana, isn't it? Sambandha has to do with identity, has to do with this material world and this material body. We come to understand that we are spirit soul. Of course, that is only the very beginning. We generally, even after coming to Krishna consciousness, it takes a long time for the living entity to actually understand or realize his actual identity, isn't it? This is what is awaiting all of us. We have a natural and eternal identity. We read about, like our Goswamis in Vrindavan, their particular identity is described, and they were such and such maidservant or gopi and whatnot. We all have an eternal relationship which is unknown to us right now. And it is only when there is a proper atmosphere, when there are proper, let's say, opportunities, when people are who are surrounding us people are living in the same community as we are. Village life is community life. Actually, it's a major topic in itself. In a place like Indonesia, for example, no one can live. I spent many years in Indonesia visiting different villages also. No one is allowed to stay in a village. Indonesia, by the way, is like very closely connected with Vedic culture. It is the largest Muslim populated country in the world, but to this day it carries Vedic culture. So no one can stay in a village unless he is agreeing to be part of the different religious functions and festivals that take place. And they have many festivals, just like in our Vaishnav culture. So many festivals are there. Now is Durga Puja, biggest festival in Bangalore. There are many kinds of festivals. Of course, as Vaishnavas, we follow some, and others we don't follow so much. But we respect all these different personalities. So they're very organized. They're very Vedic in so many ways, and therefore we can see, if you ever happen to visit Indonesia, and actually I would like to invite, I should take this opportunity, to invite you to our village. We have a village, one particular village that we have called Gitanagari. Just like we spoke about the essay of Gitanagari. So in 1999, so that's like 22 years ago, we established a village, from scratch, from nothing. And to this day, that village is functioning, existing. The point I wanted to make it actually is that because of this, we could say, Vedic influence, I've noticed that in Indonesia in particular, I would say that I have noticed that more in Indonesia than in India. This very close-knit relationship. They are like very family-oriented. They are very respectful. That's, of course, part of Vedic culture. Very respectful to one another, very respectful to their elders. Naturally, this is, of course, attractive, isn't it? So village life, when there is focus, when the focus is the same, that is the whole meaning actually of Daiva Varnashrama. Daiva Varnashrama means everyone is focused on devotion. Daiva means divine. What is divine? The most divine of all things is bhakti, devotion, devotional service. When everyone in a community is focused on serving Krishna, then there will naturally be a very close-knit, very close relationship. And when we have, it's like in the material world, everyone is looking for relationship. Facebook is all about relationship. Even they have these people sometimes, I'm in a relationship now. Of course, because Krishna is not in the center, people go into a relationship and go out of a relationship. They're constantly changing. But village life is when there is that proper focus on Krishna, of course, on spiritual life, especially spiritual life as we know it, because Krishna is a person, and identity or relationships is based on person, isn't it? all of us, Prabhupada explains how by nature we are always, all of us, we are searching for friendship. We need friendship. We are searching for love, isn't it? We cannot live without loving others, and we cannot live also without being loved. And of course, the focus and the basis is meant to be Krishna. And when that dimension or aspect is absent, that's why in Vrindavan we hear about these very, very intimate, very close relationships. Vrindavan is all about relationships. Vrindavan is that place, and that the different leelas that are manifest in Vrindavan allow for all of the different rasas. Actually, relationship has to do with rasa. Prabhupada explains there's two main categories of rasa. There is material rasa, and then there is spiritual rasa. If we don't know about spiritual rasa, we'll be caught up in material rasa. Yeah. And material rasa, of course, is all based on competition, conflict, and therefore a cause of suffering. Whereas spiritual rasa is the opposite. It's all about harmony, harmonizing, inspiring, supporting one another. And therefore, when such a community is given an opportunity to exist, the residents of those places, the residents of such communities, they become very ideal in so many ways. I was mentioning how there are descriptions of how villages used to be in India. How villages used to be before, let's say, before modernization kicked in. Prabhupada explains, one devotee was telling Prabhupada, our leaders have spoiled, since so many centuries, our villages in our countries are very disrupted. Prabhupada actually corrected that devotee by telling it is quite recent. It is only since the days of what we call modernization or industrialization. Before that, we find very wonderful descriptions that are very similar to what we find actually in the Bhagavatam. People were much more in the mode of goodness. People were very respectful to one another, and the kind of sinful activities or vice, the vice that we find all over the world, including villages nowadays, was simply not there, at least not on the scale. There's always, especially Kali Yuga, the tendency is there, but not on the kind of scale that we find today. So in other words, this is one of many reasons why we should be attracted. So the queens of Dwarka, isn't it? The queens of Dwarka were always wondering, Krishna, his servants are there, but Krishna seems to be absent-minded. Why is Krishna absent-minded? Then of course they found out Krishna is absent-minded because although he's surrounded by all of this opulence, he is attracted. He's always carrying with him the mood and the mentality in Vrindavan. I'll tell you a short anecdote. That's from the Bhagavatam. Not the Bhagavatam, I think. Where did I find this? I think maybe in the Satsandarbha of Srila Jiva Goswami. It is mentioned that when Krishna and Balaram left Vrindavan, naturally Vasudeva and Devaki naturally were very happy to have Krishna back, you have to get an education. We have to send you to Gurukul. And before that, they wanted to perform this sacred thread ceremony, because actually in the Vedic culture, this in our ISKCON society we call it Brahmana thread. Actually, it's not Brahmana thread, by the way. It's sacred thread, because sacred thread is meant to be given to Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. We're not there yet. Maybe one day. Actually, if we want to establish Varnashram, we'll have to do that at some point. But coming back to this very nice pastime, so when Krishna heard that, in the Vedic culture, it's a very elaborate ceremony, someone to receive sacred thread, usually at a very young age. So something, it's like, it happens only once in your life. And there are special, like Jamiyas perform, it's like a big festival, it's a major event. So it is described that actually Krishna purposely did not invite his friends from Vrindavan, although this was like a major event in his life. And why he did not invite his friends from Vrindavan? Who can say? Krishna was thinking that these people in Mathura, Mathura is not a village, right? Mathura is a town, city-like town. So Krishna was thinking that if I invite my friends from Vrindavan, the residents of Vrindavan, their way of thinking, their way of interacting, their way of dealing amongst themselves is very different than from these people in Mathura. So there is all likelihood that they might be offended, which is actually something very interesting and very important as well. It's like, before we took the Krishna consciousness, naturally, our way of dealing with people, our way of thinking, our feelings were different. When we take up the Krishna consciousness, we kind of, at least we are meant to refine our ways. That comes through the process of purification, isn't it? We read from Bhagavad Gita, Pandita Samadharshinaha. So everyone is a spirit soul. And I was stopping at Prabhupada's birthplace. That was just opened recently. And I was there for a few minutes, and there was one sign, one quote from Prabhupada mentioning that actually all living entities are eternal servants or are eternal devotees. This is the vision. Everyone is actually a devotee. The problem is that most people have forgotten that they are devotees. So Krishna purposely did not invite the residents of Vrindavan to avoid that they become in any way disturbed or offended, because the mentality of city folks is different. So in other words, in this more natural setting of village life, there's a whole reality which is only known to those who actually live in villages. The way people interact with one another, because in a village, as you know, or as you can maybe guess, you may not know, but in a village, everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows what everyone is doing. So you have to be careful. You can't hide practically anything from anyone because people are just living, so close together. That's why it is mentioned. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that the elder brahmanas in the village, they are meant to, before a young boy reaches the age of 15, this is the tradition. They are meant to actually identify and fix up the varna of the young boy. This is one of the very important duties and responsibilities of brahmanas. Because unless we know our varna, Prabhupada would explain, first is varna, then is ashram. Also this has to do with relationship. Everything has to do actually with relationship, how we are meant to interact amongst ourselves, and based on our, based on our nature. We all have different natures connected with the gunas, with the modes of material nature. This all explained in the Bhagavad Gita. So the more we can, let's say, follow or acknowledge and live according to our nature, of course, we have spiritual nature, we have material nature. So dharma actually means synchronizing with our spiritual nature as eternal servants of Krishna and synchronizing with our material nature. That's why Varnashrama is so important. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that the system of Varna and Ashrama is for Vaishnavas who are still in their conditioned state. Because we don't immediately become pure devotees overnight, isn't it? We don't become anything overnight. Except maybe fallen. We can become fallen. We don't become fallen, we're already fallen. So, in this way, actually, when we read such descriptions, especially from the 10th canto, Vrindavan life, and of course, Vrindavan life means spiritual life, is full of subtleties, very subtle. We say another word is esoteric. Esoteric means very, very high, very delicate, very sensitive. Spiritual life is something that is very, very sensitive because it is meant to be very personal, isn't it? So therefore, the Vedic culture, we can understand from this, the more we are close to what is our spiritual and material nature, then the more we will make proper connection and more easily we will be able to establish wholesome, healthy relationships. And it all begins with relationships. I've mentioned a few times how in the Dasamula Tattva of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in describing the 10 tattvas, how many have read Dasamula Tattva? How many have heard about it? Yeah, it's very important. All of the basic tattvas are nicely presented, and out of those 10 tattvas, 7 of them are having to do with sambandha. 7 of them have to do with relationship. So relationship is actually further. It is only when we come proper activities that will enhance, further understand and realize our spiritual nature and spiritual position. And of course, when that is nicely, systematically followed, sambandha, abhideya, prayojana, then we will reach the final destination or goal, which is to regain or revive our eternal loving relationship with Krishna. So that means that you need to have, or to encourage at least one of your devotees here to learn the flute. Coming back to the verse. The flute not only has a very positive and healthy effect on cows, but it can help brahmacharis also become more peaceful. Yeah, just like they have made experiments with pregnant mothers. You know, pregnant mothers, they've taken a group of pregnant mothers and they've played classical music. And then another group, they played modern music. And they noticed the difference between the consciousness of the, after being born. Children who were in the womb of mothers hearing classical music fared out much better than those who were hearing modern music. Yeah, well, it's just like in the Bhagavatam, Prahlad Maharaj was fortunate to be in the womb of his mother who was hearing the Bhagavatam. And because of, even within the womb of his mother, by hearing the transcendental sound of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because he was being asked that question, he was speaking to his classmates, and they were wondering, hey, you're like us, you know, we're from demon family, you're one of us. Why are you speaking different? So then he explained, well, you know, I heard all these things when I was in the womb of my mother. There's no Mataji's here, but very important. Anyways, those who will become grihastas and fathers in the future, we should keep that in mind. So in this way, actually, Vedic culture, especially again, this highlights in many ways. I mean, these pastimes are taken from a village, the village of Vrindavan. Prabhupada wanted that we create, that we demonstrate, that we duplicate this same mood and atmosphere that we find in the original village of Vrindavan. That original Vrindavan village is a replica of the spiritual world, isn't it, of Goloka Vrindavan? And therefore, if we do that, then even before going back to Vaikuntha, or rather to Goloka within Vaikuntha, even before going back to the spiritual world, Prabhupada explains, or Acharyas, we can experience living in the spiritual world in the material world, isn't it? These temples that we are establishing are meant to to actually help us create that atmosphere, and in this way, of course, every single devotee who's part of a temple needs to individually cultivate this kind of understanding, and the more devotees are doing that, whoever comes, they can begin to sense and experience this place as being very different than ordinary place. So maybe we can take a few minutes for any comments or questions regarding Krishna's flute play. Anyone here play the flute, by the way? Raise your hand. So this great, no flute player here? Actually, yeah, by the next time I visit, I'd like to see at least one flute player. I mean, not only holding the flute, but actually playing. Okay, yeah.
I have a question. The past time the Krishna did the Govardhan Giri. After that, then on the recommendation of Brahma, we went there to specify Krishna with Matastuti. And in the same canto, chapter number 27, verse number 1, in the commentary, it is written there that Matastuti, which stays there, he was from the Bhulok, Golok. In that Golok is situated in the Bhulok. So, where is that Golok Maharaj?
It was kind of like breaking a little bit.
You see that it is said that in Indra pastime, when Shurbi came, so Acharya mentioned that Shurbi was from Golok Vrindavan, which is Golok in Bhulok. So where is that place?
Golok and Bhulok. Is it?
So
You're going to read the reference.
where is that place from where this Shurbi came? But then, like that. Indra means that Shurbi and
Well, we know that within the material world there is Shvetadvi. It's very amazing that within the material world there is the spiritual world, at least a manifestation of the spiritual world. And we also know that Shvetadvi here after the churning of the ocean, churning of the milk ocean. So I only know of one place in the material world where there is the spiritual presence, I mean, besides Vrindavan. But of course, Vrindavan is what we call Bhoma Vrindavan. So within the material world, this Vishnu resides. That's the only place from where Surabhi can come from in the material world. I have not read it, but that is described as being the manifestation of the spiritual world, I mean, the Shvetadvip within the material world. Decreasing. Yeah.
Last 50 years, I think, the cities have increased almost now. The city is now 30% of the whole population, and now the villages are only 70%, and there is a forecast that within the next 3 decades, the city population will take over the village population.
Yes.
So we are seeing that even those who are staying in the villages, they are no more villagers. They are getting modernized due to the internet. So it seems that turning the towns and the cities into they were but understand and they have Brahma.
Okay.
So how do you any comment on that? And how can you make the cities replica of those ideal cities?
Okay, I think I got the question. amidst all the competition, sound competition here. It is a fact that actually it is more than 30% urbanization. Population in the villages fell below 70% in cities. In America, are living in cities. Villages is going up. 98% of the population. So the idea is that it is very true that Mathura was there, Dwarka was there, Hastinapur was there. Were cities. There were always cities, because cities is actually the place for the Kshatriyas to manage. But the vast majority of the population are not meant to be living there. The vast percentage of any population are meant to be living in a more simple, natural environment that we call villages. So we should see it, as devotees, we should see what is happening today as a major deviation, which is based on, very much connected with this whole modernization, industrialization, and this madness for more and more material, so-called happiness. When we take out the spiritual or divine dimension out of our life, what are we left with? We're left with the material world. We're left with material. We have to have enjoyment. We're talking about material rasa. If we don't have spiritual rasa, if we don't know about spiritual rasa, if we don't experience that, then we obviously we will simply concentrate on material. So we as devotees should see this as a very dangerous trend that has been ongoing since it started approximately 200 years ago. And that's why Prabhupada mentioned in a number of places, a number of occasions, that modern civilization is a doomed civilization. Modern civilization will soon come to an end. We should be aware of this. Unsustainable. And the way we are living, we are destroying ourselves by destroying the planet. Do you know that every day, every single day, between 150 and 200 species, whether they are animal species, insect species, between 150 and 200 species are destroyed, becoming extinct every single day. And we are also one of the species. We're a human species. But we actually can we can only continue to exist with the presence of other species, isn't it? In other words, we are dependent on other species. Therefore, the more we allow other species to become extinct, just like, small example, we know that the bees, big crisis in the bee community. Bees, since maybe the last 10 years, bee colonies are dying off. Very big crisis. We don't realize it because we're so out of touch with nature. If there are no bees on the planet anymore, we will die. Why? Because bees have a very, it's not because bees produce honey that we will die. It's because bees pollinate, isn't it? They help in the production and they pollinate. So that's Krishna's natural, very intelligent, scientific arrangement, so that food can be produced on a large scale. If humans had to pollinate, we couldn't keep up. We couldn't do it. So if we destroy the bees, that means that we cut off, one of our basic daily necessities of life, food. We've been doing this on a massive scale because of this madness for, so-called material advancement, so-called material, happiness and comfort. In the meantime, we are destroying nature. You know that in the last 20 or 30 years, in the last 20 to 30 years, the natural resources on the planet here, one of those resources, for example, is oil, and so many other resources, water, natural resource. We have already used up 33%, 1/3 of the natural resources. It generally takes like thousands of years to produce some of these natural resources. We have become so intelligent and so advanced in modern society that we have been able to destroy 30% of that in a short, 20, 30-year span. So many things, so many we could say, very often we don't even hear about it because modern life especially is keeping us on the go, and it's really, very difficult to keep up and to understand what is actually going on. We should know, at least as devotees, that the more we deviate from dharma, therefore the importance of understanding what is dharma. Therefore the importance of understanding what is spiritual dharma as well as material dharma. The more we use machines to cultivate, this is adharma. We are destroying the soil, isn't it? Nowadays, Prabhupada would explain, if you don't use the bulls, then they will be sent to the slaughterhouse. In the last few years, I've been visiting, as was mentioned a little earlier, 108 villages as part of my research. And I tell you, in many of these villages, there's no more bull. You don't find any bulls. And the number of cows is like very less. When the day will come, and Krishna forbid that it comes, when the day comes when there will no longer be cows in villages, those villages will no longer exist for a long time. And when villages no longer exist, what are all these people in the high-rise apartments going to do for their food? This whole pandemic, for example, that we have all been experiencing in the last 2 years approximately, should have sent this very clear message to all of us, especially who are devotees. And I'm sure even many people who are not devotees, those who are a little bit, conscious, will have had some kind of realization that one of the major lessons we should take from this pandemic is that we need to become localized. That is an important, village life means localized living. Not having to travel. Prabhupada many times he would explain, one of the major defects of modern civilization, people have to go far away every day, isn't it, to work. That's not natural, you see. So yes, the fact that our villages are becoming less and less should send a signal, a very clear signal to all of us that we are going in the wrong direction. We are going in the direction of actually mass destruction. We cannot imagine actually how much destructive this is to understand and appreciate this more natural way of living, which is based on village life. Yeah. So therefore, what we need to do as devotees, we need to understand the basis and the foundation, of Vedic culture, which is land and cows. It actually begins with cows. Cows, land, and proper cultivation of knowledge. These three go hand. Avidya. Our Shastra has Paravidya and Aparavidya. Modern day knowledge does not fall in the category of Paravidya, no spirituality. All kinds of knowledge and Vidya. Yes. Last question. Right?
Sometimes even the understand the urgency of renewability our principles, but actually due to the circumstances it appears to be difficult or it appears to be impractical to actually directly come to that state. For example,
You mean if tomorrow you don't have any food, that's impractical?
to go back to the same
It's not a matter of going back. You have to understand that up until 200 years ago, for centuries, this was and is meant to be the standard. Human nature, the modes of material nature have always been there, will always be there, as long as we are here in the material world. And there's a natural way of living, which is helping us to be in harmony with nature and harmony with God. If we don't believe in God, that's a person's individual choice. But we as devotees, who are meant to know and to understand about God, about Krishna, we should know what is Krishna's plan and system so that we can live in harmony with nature and we can more easily, more naturally develop our Krishna consciousness. It is a wrong, mistaken understanding to say or to conclude going back to something which we may consider impractical. Do you mean to tell me that the whole modern setup of modern civilization is practical? People are committing suicide every day because it is most unnatural, artificial, because people are not cared for, because people are eating food which is male, especially in America, a bad lifestyle. And more practical, you should follow what's explained by our founder. Deviated. That you have to understand. Life is also another kind of empire. And it is about to collapse. It is time to wake up. Srila Prabhupada mentioned the automobile industry. He mentioned this in 1973. Automobile industry, using cars, going around as we are now, will only last 50 years. 1973. So this kind of reasoning on the part of devotees should absolutely not be there. It's simply a lack of understanding. Definitely, the whole modern civilization and modern leaders, they're going 100% in that, we say modern, way of living. But they are so ignorant, they are not understanding how destructive this is. It is destructive to individuals, both socially, emotionally, physically, what to speak of spiritually. Because they are, for the most part, very, very ignorant about spiritual life. Otherwise, why they would allow why they would be passing all kinds of legislation promoting or advocating abortion and the killing of cows. We have to understand the basic principles and concepts that are making up what we call Vedic culture. And Vedic culture is not something of bygone days. Unfortunately, some of our devotees are sometimes making this kind of statement that Vedic culture was something of the past. I'm sorry, that is not what Prabhupada is teaching us. Vedic culture means a culture based on knowledge. And Vedic knowledge is directly connected with Sanatana Dharma. And Sanatana Dharma, anyone who knows a little bit of Sanskrit will understand that it is a dharma that is meant to be unchanged, natural activity in relationship with Krishna. And that activity can fully satisfy, can fulfill our need. Similarly, on the material level, there is an eternal dharma that is called Varnashrama Dharma. And if we fail, as we are now, if we fail to understand the basic components and the basic principles of this Varnashrama Dharma, we will fail. We will fail as a society. We may wrongly think that this is impractical, but actually it is the most practical. Devotees were asking this very same question actually to Prabhupada. Is this really what we should be doing? Because the whole of modern society is going in a completely opposite direction. We should know, based on Shastra, that the direction that they're going in is actually the direction of destruction. That should be so obvious to all of us. Thanking all of you for giving us an opportunity to spend a little bit of time here. We hope to come back. And at least one flute, huh? Maybe more also. If one devotee starts to play the flute, it's like contagious. Others will also. Jai, thank you very much. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai Samasta Gaur Bhagavatam ki. Gaur